Hello and welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the Red Alert 3 armor design philosophy. Examining some of the choices made in the armor doctrines in the alternate World War III world of Red Alert 3, knowing how the doctrines played out in Tiberium Generals and in our own universe, it can be quite difficult to understand why they are the way they are. There are some strange design choices that, while being explained by the wacky nature of the game, do not make sense in the well-ordered designs of the rest of the Red Alert series and the C&C series in general. Surprisingly, for people who don't follow this universe, a lot of thought was put into the production of the designs for the weapons and vehicles in this game. And so, just like with other games like 40K or Dune, I take these designs as seriously as I would when watching a Spookston video on tanks of the real world. Within every design is a philosophy that differed from our own, in reaction to conditions that varied enough to give those choices meaning. I went into this a little bit in the video for the MCVs, but I want to go into it a little bit more now. From the outside looking in, as I started researching the world of Red Alert 3, I was amazed at the seemingly nonsensical choices made by the generals in charge of R&D for these weapons, particularly the abandonment of things like explosive reactive armor, or the small size of the cannons of the vehicles. The cannon on the Hammer tank from the Soviets is a mere 85 millimeters. The one for the Imperials is a little larger, at 88 millimeters. The successor to the Grizzly tank has a 90 millimeter gun. By the 70s in our world, the main battle tank of the Americans was the M60, which had a 105mm gun. The Russian T-72 had a 125mm, and our T-64 had the same. Why would anyone advocate for smaller weapons, as the power of these weapons and these vehicles and those used in combat them grow year by year? To find the answer, or any answer, I had to reorient my frame of reference somewhat. The Second World War had an incredible diversity of vehicles and tactics, and a tremendous amount was learned by every side in the conflict about what worked and what didn't work. In a world without nuclear weapons, what would that lesson be? Another potential video topic that needs to be done is to look at the implications of the Red Alert 3 timeline on the Second World War. What sort of situations might have come up because of the changes in the timeline. Keeping in mind that, of course, I'm not a historian of the period, only a connoisseur. Talking with a few people I knew with direct experience with the war, or knowledge gained from family members that had fought in the war and then relayed to me, one of the most important things that was learned about war going forward was the lesson was that the best tanks, vehicles, and weapons didn't win the war. It was the ones that were good enough to do the job that won it. In the long run, the Sherman and the T-34 won the war over vehicles like the Tiger, which were far more advanced. They were simpler to repair, reliable, and for every one Tiger that came out of the factories, 10 Shermans would pop out ready to fight. In the world of today, with more advanced weapons, this is less the case, but still mostly true. Ultimately, the most successful designs from the Tiberium and Generals universes use this concept liberally, only with minor improvements to survivability for the large majority of the vehicles. If the name of the game wasn't total dominance in technology and complexity, then the Cold War would be a game of spending primarily, especially if there weren't any nukes involved. In the game, after World War II, which seems to be a draw of some sort, at least in the East, the game is keeping parity. How many people can you throw into the fight, how much material, and how creative can you get with analog systems? One of the major things in the game is that all of the vehicles are clad in just well-made steel armor. While their engines are undoubtedly more powerful than they were in the World War II period, they are not better protected, which may be a reason not to go higher than 90mm in cannon size. If they could reliably penetrate enemy armor at those levels, it might not be more complicated for a reason than that. It does present other problems, however, like that the Allied and Imperial missile technology would be utterly dominant on a Red Alert 3 battlefield, likely striking and killing these vehicles in 1 or 2 shots. Along with that, the flak guns used by the Russians being basically incapable of damaging Allied or Imperial tanks, and being less helpful against jet aircraft. But again, that's a discussion for another time. There could be another answer to this as well in looking at the locations these vehicles were used and designed for. Russians generally used larger tanks, notably using an ultra-heavy tank in the Apocalypse tank. These sorts of vehicles, in conjunction with tactics like massed column warfare, works best in open plains, flat areas, which excel in Russia and the entrance to Europe, but do poorly in mountains and tightly packed areas like Europe proper. Taking an example from the Second World War, this is kind of like how the Germans had a really hard time navigating hedgerows, and the Americans, with the much smaller vehicles, the dozer blades, managed to navigate them just fine. On the other hand, the by comparison compact vehicles, such as the Guardian tank and the Tsunami tank, were designed for fighting around mountains and extreme terrain, including water for the Imperial side. The strategy for the Third World War on the Allied side included a lot of retreating from the Red advance, and that would not change in the game either, as the Soviet tanks were meant to batter through defenses, in-depth strategy of the Allies, and occupy Europe quickly. Allied tanks were designed likewise to perform best in their own terrain as a defensive measure, and Imperial tanks were meant to be versatile for an empire built on a weak foundation resource-wise. By the general compact nature of the fighting, taking place in dense urban areas for large parts of the game, larger cannons and frames might have been more of a detriment than an advantage. Ultimately, in terms of cool factor, if we're looking for a discrepancy of power between the universes, it's useful to know that these games are meant to be cool for different reasons. It's sort of like the high-tech Tiberium, the analog Red Alert, and the conventional Generals. Comparing them directly is a little bit like comparing Skrin mind-controlling technology to a Yuri clone, in entirely different paradigms. Anyway, this was sort of a half-scripted thought process video where I wanted to talk about something that I was having trouble with, doing some of the Red Alert stuff. And I hope that you found it entertaining, and I look forward to hearing about it in the comments. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.